Democracy is in trouble, no question about that. And it comes in part from a deep dilemma in which it is embedded. It's increasingly irrelevant to the kinds of decisions we face that have to do with global pandemics, a cross-border problem, with HIV, a transnational problem, with markets and immigration, something that goes beyond national borders, with terrorism, with war, all now cross-border problems. In fact, we live in a 21st century world of interdependence and brutal interdependent problems. And when we look for solutions in politics and in democracy, we are faced with political institutions designed 400 years ago. Autonomous, sovereign nation states with jurisdictions and territories separate from one another, each claiming to be able to solve the problem of its own people. 21st century, transnational world of problems and challenges, 17th century world of political institutions. In that dilemma lies the central problem of democracy. And like many others, I've been thinking about what can one do about this asymmetry between 21st century challenges and archaic and increasingly dysfunctional political institutions like nation states. And my suggestion is that we change the subject, that we stop talking about nations, about bordered states, and we start talking about cities. Because I think you will find when we talk about cities, we are talking about the political institutions in which civilization and culture were born. We are talking about the cradle of democracy. We are talking about the venues in which those public spaces where we come together to create democracy and at the same time protest those who would take our freedom take place. Think of some great names: the Place de la Bastille, Zuccotti Park, Tahrir Square, Taksim Square in today's headlines in Istanbul, or yes, Tiananmen Square in Beijing. Those are the public spaces where we announce ourselves as citizens, as participants, as people with the right to write our own narratives. Cities are not only the oldest of institutions, they're the most enduring. If you think about it, Constantinople, Istanbul, much older than Turkey. Alexandria, much older than Egypt. Rome, far older than Italy. Cities endure the ages. They are the places where we are born, grow up, are educated, work, marry, pray, play, get old, and in time die. They are home. Very different than nation states, which are abstractions. We pay taxes, we vote occasionally, we watch the men and women we choose rule more or less without us. Not so in those homes known as our towns and cities where we live. Moreover, today, more than half of the world's population live in cities. In the developed world, it's about 78%. More than 3 out of 4 people live in urban institutions, urban places, in cities today. So cities are where the action is. Cities are us. Aristotle said in the ancient world, man is a political animal. I say we are an urban animal. We are an urban species at home in our cities. So to come back to the dilemma, if the dilemma is we have old-fashioned political nation states unable to govern the world, respond to the global challenges that we face, like climate change, then maybe it's time for mayors to rule the world. For mayors and the citizens and the peoples they represent to engage in global governance. When I say if mayors rule the world, when I first came up with that phrase, it occurred to me that actually they already do. There are scores of international, intercity, cross-border institutions, networks of cities in which cities are already quite quietly below the horizon, working together to deal with climate change, to deal with security, to deal with immigration, to deal with all of those tough, interdependent problems that we face. They have strange names. UCLG, United Cities and Local Governments. ICLE, the International Council of Local Environmental Issues. And the list goes on. CityNet in Asia, City Protocol, a new organization out of Barcelona that is using the web to share best practices among countries. And then all the things we know a little better, the US Conference of Mayors, the Mexican Conference of Mayors, the European Conference of Mayors. Mayors are where this is happening. And so the question is, how can we create a world in which mayors and the citizens they represent play a more prominent role? Well, to understand that, we need to understand why cities are special, why mayors are so different than prime ministers and presidents, because my premise is that a mayor and a prime minister are at the opposite ends of a political spectrum. To be a prime minister or president, you have to have an ideology. You have to have a meta-narrative. You have to have a theory of how things work. You have to belong to a party. Independents on the whole don't get elected to office. But mayors are just the opposite. Mayors are pragmatists. They're problem solvers. Their job is to get things done, and if they don't, they're out of a job. Mayor Nutter of Philadelphia said, "We could never get away here in Philadelphia with the stuff that goes on in Washington, the paralysis, the non-action, the inaction." Why? Because potholes have to get filled, because the trains have to run, because kids have to be able to get to school. And that's what we have to do, and to do that is about pragmatism in that deep American sense, reaching outcomes. Washington, Beijing, Paris, as world capitals, are anything but pragmatic. But real city mayors have to be pragmatists. They have to get things done. They have to put ideology and religion and ethnicity aside and draw their cities together. We saw this a couple of decades ago when Teddy Kollek, the great mayor of Jerusalem in the 80s and the 90s, was besieged one day in his office by religious leaders from all of the backgrounds, Christian prelates, rabbis, imams. They were arguing with one another about access to the holy sites. And the squabble went on, and Kollek listened and listened, and he finally said, "Gentlemen, spare me your sermons, and I will fix your sewers." That's what mayors do. They fix sewers.